Hi friends, hi, how's it going? So happy to see you today. Sorry about the crazy inconsistency going on with my schedule these days. I have been swamped with all things personal life and work life, and I have been super swamped. So there's that. Today we're going to dig into another palette review via my palette Roulette series. Typically I have let an app choose the palette that I use, but here lately I'm choosing my own dang palette because there are some palettes in my collection I want to use that app is not choosing. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, just keep watching. We will get there. For those of you new here, hi, my name is Donna. So happy to meet you. So happy to have you here today. So glad that you found me. I hope that you'll stick around, choose to hit that subscribe button, choose to hit those notification bells so that I show up in your feed. If you are interested in somebody who's going to let you know that it's okay to do what you want, wear whatever you want to wear, because age is just a thing. It doesn't matter. I am in my 40s and love all crazy, colorful, high-end beauty and self-care, and I hope that you find that I suit your needs, that I fit right into that perfect partner in crime that you're looking for. So let's just jump into the palette that I'm reviewing today. And the one I am reviewing today is this one here. This is the Natasha Denona Metropolis Palette. And y'all, this sat on my wish list forever. And it sat on my wish list forever for, I don't know, honestly, because the colors are right up my alley, honestly. That grungy princess girl look that I love to do, these colors suit that need. This was Natasha Denona's 5th anniversary palette. This was the 5th anniversary of her doing those giant 28 pan green, brown, purple, blue palettes, which I do have, and I'll show you comparison of the size of these two palettes. And those palettes really spurred her career in makeup, in beauty. So, I mean, she was a makeup artist well before that, but those palettes were the first real palettes that she put together for a commercialized aspect. This palette comes in at 4.3 stars on Sephora with 247 reviews. It comes in at 4.6 stars on Google with 1,700 reviews, and it comes in at 4.3 stars on Beautylish with 38 reviews. And it is probably fair to say I would probably rank it right up in that 4.6 star rating. I do think that the one on Google is super fair. 4.6 stars is really where I think it's at. The 4.3 star rating on Sephora and Beautylish I found was maybe a little bit skewed by the fact that the color story was not something that the people that were ranking it loved. And what I have to say to that is, why then did you buy the palette? I mean, really, that's what I gotta say about it. Why then did you buy the palette? You have to know that with the 28 shades in here, you probably are going to find some similarities in your collection if you have a rather large collection. What I would say, though, is that if this is your one and done Natasha Denona palette, I do think that it's probably a great one and done Natasha Denona palette for you. With that being said, it is $129 for 28 shades. And this is what the palette looks like. It is a beautiful, like, teal faux leather construction, and then the back just looks like this. It just has just a plain back with a sticker on it that tells you all about the palette, and it's like batch code. You open it up, it does have a wonderful mirror. I don't typically take the things off my mirrors. The shade names are on that, and then this is the color story of this palette. I do think that this is a beautiful grungy fall tone eyeshadow palette that just is filthy dirty because I dug my fingers into these shadows so many times. I think that it is a beautiful fall time palette, and if I remember correctly, it came out in 2019 around September, so perfect for that fall like thought process. $129 for this. There is 0.048 ounces of product per pan, or 1.35 ounces total in this palette. For comparison purposes, this is her regular size 28 pan eyeshadow palette. This one is the green brown, and the size difference of these two are pretty immense, right? There's a whole like section on both the side and the top that you could fit like a ton more shadows into, especially shadows the size that are in this palette here. When you open them up, the pan size in the green brown is definitely her full size pan size, whereas the one in the Metropolis is more of the midi size pan size. Pan size on these shadows is 0.08 ounces, or just over 0.08 ounces, which is just about twice the size of a ColourPop eyeshadow, twice the size of what is in this. So this is her 28 pan midi palette. It is almost roughly the same size as her 15 pan eyeshadow palettes. They are a little bit taller, but this one is a little bit wider. And then as far as the midi size 15 pan palette, you can see the difference here in that size. It's almost the same as the difference between this and the regular size 28 pan eyeshadow palette. The only difference is it doesn't have that top layer up here. So it is approximately the same size as a midi, only compensating for 28 shades versus the 15 in here. The 15 pan eyeshadow palettes for the midis also have a lot of space in between the shadows so that she can put the shadow names on the palette. This one obviously does not have that space, and the shadow names are on the little shadow sheet there. There are 28 shades in this palette, and all 28 of the shades in here were new at the time that this palette was made, and there was one new eyeshadow formula in here. And when I dug down into the eyeshadow, codes that are on Natasha Denona palettes, the only one that I can think is new is the CP one, which is the cream to powder formula that she did have in other formulations, or in other palettes, I should say, in another formula of that cream to powder. This one is a new and improved version of that cream to powder formula. It is a limited edition palette, but it is still for sale currently on the Natasha Denona website, Beautylicious, and Sephora. Those were the three places that I looked. You can probably find it in other locations that are sold by Natasha Denona, but it is still currently for sale, and it's been for sale for about 2 years, even though it's a limited edition. It was first launched, I guess, around the same time that the 2019 Sephoria happened. And I know that she did a giant, class, so to speak, when that happened at Sephoria. I'll go ahead and link it down in the description box because it is really a great showcase of what this palette can do. I do have video of me putting an eye look together using this palette too, which I will get in here as well. I'm not going to live swatch these, but I will have pictures of swatches for you. Just because there's 28 of them, you all know how I roll with palettes that just have way too many shades. What I would say is for 28 shadows, this is more of a wanted in my collection for 28 shades than say this for just 10 more shades. I mean, you guys, this palette takes up about a third of the size of this giant one for just 10 less shades of the same size, or except for the big ones, of course. If all 28 pan eyeshadow palettes could come in this size, I would have as many of them as I wanted, because they would fit neatly into my collection. The shades in this palette is inspired by the 1920s New York color scheme with Gatsby colors and dirty grungy greens and coppers and coppery golds, and just really that kind of grunginess that existed in New York City around that time frame. It is made up of multiple different formulations, including her creamy matte, her metallic, her duochrome, her high shine metallic, which is a metallic nonetheless, and then her cream to powder formula that is what I believe is the new formulation in this palette, because I do believe this was the first palette with the new formula of that cream to powder. It is the first time for the 28 Pan Midi palette, and I believe there was only one Midi palette prior to this that was a 15 shade eyeshadow palette. I believe it was the Sunrise, the pink and gold and orange one. It is really super friendly to beginners because everything blends so seamlessly. It doesn't need any kind of like idiosyncrasies that you are normally doing for a shadow to work well. It doesn't need any special brushes. It doesn't, like, everything in this palette works super, super good and is super beginner friendly because of it. I think that of the formulations of all the Natasha Denona shadows that I have, this is probably the best one. I have not had any problems making this palette work, making these shadows work, no matter what. Like, I've used them with primer, I've used them without primer, I've used them wet, I've used them dry. I think that also none of these shadows need to be wet to work. I think that I was kind of scared of the cream to powder formula because she has had that in the past and it wasn't the easiest one to work with, and there are 11 of those shades in here. I didn't have any problems with these ones. So happy about the new formulation. It doesn't really get the hard pan on it that the old cream to powder formulation did. I don't see any hard pan in my shadow palette at all. The ones in the cranberry palette I ended up getting rid of because I didn't like that formulation in that palette. It didn't work for me. I hated it. It's very medium to deep tone friendly. If you have a darker complexion, this is going to work for you. I think the lightest shade for somebody of my complexion to use is like a crease shade is this one, and it's still really kind of a dark crease shade for somebody of my complexions. Also, I feel like all of the shadows in this palette work really well as far as blendability. There is no like catching or skipping or, you know, voiding of a shadow next to another shadow. You know, sometimes you get that when you're trying to blend out a shimmer formula into the crease or whatever it is. Sometimes you get a little bit of patchiness. That doesn't exist with this palette. The textures in this palette are going to be the standouts, and where while you could probably pull out just about any old fall color story palette, you're probably going to have an orange that looks very similar to this, and a green that looks very similar to this, and a mustard yellow that looks very similar to this. The textures in this palette and how easily these blend is going to be where it's at for you. Again, like I said, if there's one Natasha Denona palette that I think is the easiest for color story, the easiest to use for beginners, the easiest to move across many different depth of skin tone, I think that this is probably the one for every single person. I have in here that it is very versatile on its own, but I did find myself wanting more color after a certain amount of time with one straight up color story. While I do think that this is very versatile, and I did get several looks out of this palette and none of them look the same, I did find myself really wanting some brighter pops, some maybe, you know, lighter mattes, some... I did find myself a little bit wanting for more, at which point I just pulled out some single shadows and mixed them with some of the colors in here. It works really well with itself, but it also worked really well with other shadows that I have in my collection. So I also have in here that it performed well with or without a primer. Also a dry or tacky primer. I know that that is something that I talk about a lot in my videos, is whether the primer needs to be dry or tacky for the shadows to perform. It also worked well with a synthetic brush versus a natural bristle brush versus my finger. All across all avenues of application, it worked just as well. The only time that I struggled with wear time with this was when I had this blue in an eye look, and I didn't quite love the blue on my inner corner, so I did try and put like a liquid eyeshadow over the top of it. And that liquid eyeshadow at the end of the day was gone, but the rest of the eyeshadow existed. At the end of the day, this lasted longer than that liquid eyeshadow did, and it was a crap liquid eyeshadow, to be honest. I would say it's got a good at least 10 hours of wear time on it, if not 12, 15, 16 hours of wear time on it. I didn't find any kind of fading or creasing at all throughout the day. I did note also in my notes that the fallout with this palette is super minimal. Those cream to powder formulations in there have zero fallout to them, which I thought was amazing. And there are 11 of them in here. So I was like, wow, these are crazy awesome. And some of them are really dark shades and there was no fallout. Where I noticed the most fallout was with some of the chunkier shimmer shades, like this one here had a wee bit of fallout. The toppers, like this one here, had a wee bit of fallout. But other than that, like, I didn't notice any kind of horrendous fallout with this. But I especially didn't notice any with those cream to powder formulas. There was none. There are some redundancies in the palette. Like, I do think that along the lines of these oranges, like, maybe they didn't all need to be in this palette. This blue and this one here maybe didn't need to both be in the palette, but one's more of a teal and this one here is more of a dark blue. I do understand why they're in here. They do have a smidge bit of a different tone or a smidge bit of a different texture. What I will also say about this is I was watching Kinky Sweat's video on this from a year ago, after I had already written down all my information. As a matter of fact, the note on that is over here on the side, because I wanted to make sure that I noted this also in my video. For those of you who maybe didn't watch her video, maybe are watching mine a year later, when Natasha Denona built this palette also, she built it so that you could work in quads and have the perfect eyeshadow look, or like focus on this color here and work in rows of 3 either way. So these 3 or these 3 would make the perfect eyeshadow look as well. So that might be why these two blues, even though they are super similar, are in the palette together, and why we have a little bit of redundancy with some of the other shades in the palette, because we wanted to make sure that you could create an eye look no matter where you were in the palette. And I thought that that was spectacular. Also, moving up any row in this palette, you could create like a quad of eyeshadows. And when I got to looking at the palette, like, I'm like, yeah, that's super smart. I mean, that makes so much sense, because when you're looking at, say, this gold here, and you want to put this gold on your eye look, like, you could do it in this quad here, and it does have really great tones. This is a green, this is a teal, that gold is there, and that mustard, and that's just a beautiful eye look just thinking about it, right? But also moving across here, moving across here, moving up and down this way too. Like, I think that you can focus on a shadow that you want to put in your eye look, like the main focus of your eye look or the star of your eye look, and then move within that realm to find the color story that you need to work with. And I thought, God, that is so smart. That is why Natasha Denona is an artist. That is why I am addicted to her eyeshadow palettes. That is why I think that she is the most amazing makeup artist out there. That is why she is my muse. Whatever. So with that said, I am pulling the swatches from online. I have to be honest. I couldn't get the lighting right, so I wanted to make sure that you guys had great lighting, but also just really wanted to talk to you about some of my favorites in the palette. So one of my favorites in the palette is this one here, and this is one of the duochromes in the palette. This one is called Orion, and it is just a really beautiful, like, pink to green duochrome. It's kind of got that like chartreusiness of it, but also kind of peachy. Do you guys see that? Oh my gosh, it is so pretty. I love it so much. Another one of my favorites is actually the green that's in my eye look, which is this green right here, this really deep like emerald green shade. I wish there were like a deep green shimmer to go with this, because I just think that it would look best with a green shimmer called Royal, and it's one of those cream to powders. And what I wanted to show you guys is the cream to powder just goes on so smoothly, and then you can just blend it out and it just goes. It just goes and goes and goes and goes for days. Look at how beautiful that blended with my finger. This red is also one of my favorites. It is, I have to say, it reminds me of a lot of the other like kind of shimmery reds that she has in her collection. Actually, this one is called Claret and it looks like this. It is considered a metallic. I have to tell you, like, none of her shadows, look at how beautifully this one blends. Even if they aren't unique to your collection in color, they're going to be unique to your collection in texture, more than likely. That is where this palette shines, is the texture of all the shadows. And I really do firmly believe that this cream to powder formula is going to be a showcase and a showstopper for many, many people in their collection. I hope that you guys did enjoy my little review of the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. That was a palette that was in my shop, my stash, and I wanted to make sure that I got this palette and the other palette used before we moved forward. But the palette that I will be utilizing throughout the week and coming to you next week and reviewing is this one. This is the Dominique Cosmetics Berries and Cream palette. This one is one that I've had in my collection for a while now, and you guys can see it is not even used. I did not have the best experience with the Dominique Cosmetics Rustic Glam palette, so I'm anxious to see if that's just a color story thing for me or if it's a formulation thing for me. So I'm really anxious to use this one. I hope that you guys did enjoy this video, and I hope that if you did, you're considering giving it a big thumbs up. It really does help our channels out here. Again, if you're new here, please consider subscribing before you go. I would love to have you along for this crazy midlife crisis of mine. I welcome you into my partner in crime family. And yeah, just see you down in the comments section. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. If you're interested in seeing another video from me, YouTube will be suggesting one to you very shortly. And if not, if it's your time to go, that's cool too. But I do hope to see you back here at some point. I do upload content 3 to 4 times a week, depending on the week. So please hit that notification bell so that you're notified when I upload a video. I'm showing up in your feed. That would be awesome. I hope that you guys are well. I hope that you and yours are staying safe. I hope that everything, 2021 is going fantastic for you. Please keep safe out there. Please love each other, but love each other from afar. And until next time, bye friends.